3 great things about fairy tales. First of all, fairy tales are both historical and universal, and they're worldwide. If you take the story of Cinderella, for example, it goes back to hundreds and hundreds of years, to Jean-Baptiste Basile's version in Italy, to Charles Perrault's version in France, to the Grimm brothers, and you see it popping up in other cultures around the world too. The oldest believed version is actually Egyptian. There's an Egyptian Cinderella about these ruby red slippers that she receives from the pharaoh. There are versions in China as well, taking us back to theories of how this story became so universal and archetypal. Did it travel along the Silk Road with Marco Polo, and that's how these stories went from one culture to the other, and where did they start? Where did this idea of a tiny foot being a desirable trait come from? And of course now we have our modern interpretations of these stories, Disney, of course, and we have these ideas of femininity and what it means to be a patient or active or strong female character. So there are a lot of things that we can take away from fairy tales in a universal sense, and everybody knows about fairy tales. If you use the term literally, a Cinderella story to describe something. We have movies like A Cinderella Man, or Ella Enchanted, or Ever After, or Cinderfella. There's a whole bunch of things out there, and it's so widespread that it can be applied to almost any situation. And that's the second thing that I like about fairy tales. With them being so widespread, it would feel like there's nothing new under the sun. But that's the beauty of it, is that there always is something new. They're really just ripe for twisting and updating and finding new ways to tell these stories in ways that bring out new truths, ways that connect to new readers. A big trend that I've seen is looking for ways to swap out characters and points of view, bringing in gender-swapped characters, or introducing LGBTQ plus characters into these stories to broaden their audience, to diversify their casts, and make them more accessible to everyone. You can also see, as in my work that I'm working on right now, crossovers among fairy tales. We've seen that in TV shows like Once Upon a Time and Grimm. What I'm working with is combining fairy tales in ways that bring out the story from an unusual perspective. Like I'm working on a gender-swapped Beauty and the Beast that crosses over with Cinderella, but spoiler alert, Cinderella's fairy godmother is the villain. So finding new ways to twist these stories and just make something new from something very old it's a beautiful thing. The third thing that I would say is lovely about fairy tales is that they are an escape from reality for anyone that reads and enjoys them or watches them on TV or Netflix. But they're also illustrating lessons and morals that can be applied to real life. They start out early on with lessons that maybe don't apply now. We don't look at the wicked stepsisters from Cinderella as being, these, they don't get the ends of their feet chopped off anymore to try and fit them into the shoes. That's not a lesson we want to teach. And we don't necessarily even see the more recent Cinderella from Disney in the 1950s as something to be aspired to, right? We don't see this kind of martyr, perfect ideal of womanhood of the 1950s as something we want to teach now. But in looking at that and comparing it to the ways that we're telling these stories now, we can see how our cultures have grown over time, and that brings us back to what makes these stories universal and what we can learn from them.